All right. Good morning, Haven. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. All right. I'm Jenny. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm honored and grateful to be in front of you today, sharing a little of my faith formation experience on this first Sunday service of Pride Month. So today's teaching fits into our current teaching series, Collective Care in Uncaring Times. We belong to one another, and God calls us to embrace each other as brothers and sisters and siblings. And so I want to talk about something that most LGBT folks are familiar with, being the target of disgust. The emotion of disgust is often the foundation of moral certainty that we hear, held by those who attack us, as if these deeply held, really base emotions are somehow universal and timeless godly truth. So I want to reassure everyone, of course, that God does not operate from a place of disgust. And this type of religious and moral certainty founded on disgust is what I would call a stumbling block away from God. So let's get started. All right. So 21 years ago, I can't believe it's been 21 years. Oh my God. Back in 2005, Stephen Colbert had a popular show on Comedy Central called The Colbert Report. And a regular segment on the report was something called The Word. And the word of the day on October 17th of that year was the word truthiness. As Stephen said, truthiness, noun. The belief in what you feel to be true rather than what the facts will support. And back then, George W. Bush was president, and Stephen Colbert was satirizing and mocking Fox News viewers. Beginning around that time, over 20 years ago, we had a growing movement in this country and across the world where people had become increasingly dug into their beliefs and rejected any facts that would contradict them. Beliefs ultimately fueled by extreme emotion. And this growing subculture of people, and it has continued growing, claim that you couldn't trust so-called facts because they came from left-wing elitist so-called experts who were engaged in some vast conspiracy to undermine what all, good, decent, honest Americans already knew to be common sense and obviously true. And this covered everything from welfare to criminal justice to foreign policy and war. And so, we laugh because we're sure we're smarter than those people, but we all do it. Our deepest, most dearly held beliefs are fueled by emotion. Every community has things that they feel are obviously true, and every community has instincts, and every community mistakes feelings for fact. And here's the kicker: of all of the emotions that masquerade as truth, disgust is the most dangerous. So let's look at scripture and let's revisit the account of Jesus healing the hemorrhaging woman in Mark chapter 5, verses 25 to 34. This passage was the focus of Sylvia's recent teaching, and there's a lot to learn from this passage. So I'll just read. Now a woman was there who had been suffering from a hemorrhage for 12 years. She had endured a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she kept saying, "If only I touch his clothes, I will be healed." At once the bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Jesus knew at once that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing against you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he looked around to see who had done it. Then the woman, with fear and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Now, the most popular interpretation of this woman's condition is some sort of vaginal or uterine bleeding. And this would have made her, under Levitical law, in the area at the time, ritually unclean. And, we throw around that term, ritually unclean, with no real understanding of what it is and what it implies. It really doesn't have an analog in American society. And so the term really has no emotional resonance for us, right? So let's look at the relevant passages in Levitical law. This is from Leviticus chapter 15, verses 19 to 27. And we'll go through this. I'll try to go through this quickly. When a woman has a discharge and her discharge is blood from her body, she is to be in her menstruation 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches, anything she lies on during her menstruation will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches her bed must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches any furniture she sits on must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If there is something on the bed or on the furniture she sits on, when he touches it, he will be unclean until evening. And if a man actually goes to bed with her so that her menstrual impurity touches him, then he will be unclean 7 days, and any bed he lies on will be unclean. Now, this is the most relevant part for the hemorrhaging woman. When a woman's discharge of blood flows many days, not at the time of her menstruation, or if it flows beyond the time of her menstruation, all the days of her discharge of impurity will be like the days of her menstruation. She is unclean. Any bed she lies on all the days of her discharge will be to her like the bed of her menstruation. Any furniture she sits on will be unclean like the impurity of her menstruation. And anyone who touches them will be unclean, and he must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. That's a lot. Now, we don't really have, in the 21st century, the cultural context of the first century Jewish territories. And most scholars place the miraculous healing account as taking place in Capernaum, which was in Galilee. So presumably, this woman was from Galilee. We don't really know what the culture would have been like in Galilee or what her life experience would actually have been. But think about it. We know that the center of social life for Jews at the time was religious. And being ritually unclean, she would have been excluded from most of it. Being ritually unclean doesn't mean sinful. After all, childbirth is a major blessing. And it renders you temporarily ritually unclean. But rules are rules. And she would not have been permitted access to the most important parts of daily life. Not only that, but anyone who associated with her would have had to take special care around her because they would regularly also have been rendered ritually unclean. She couldn't touch them, they couldn't touch her, and they couldn't even touch things she sat on. And remember the requirements to wash your clothes and bathe, and imagine how difficult that actually is without hot running water. So she and the people close to her lived like this for 12 years. Now, many people preach this passage, and there are often embellishments that aren't substantiated by the text or by historical accounts of the time. We don't actually know if she was completely ostracized. We don't know if nobody ever touched her. We don't know if she was homeless. We don't know if she was forbidden from all social interactions. And by the way, as an aside, these sermons can get really anti-Semitic. Like, what are these Jews doing to this poor woman? Well, with all due respect and with all due humility, they aren't doing anything differently than what we still do today. Because people are people, and people begin to avoid complications, people become anxious, people keep their distance, and even the most well-intentioned of people might have given up in the face of constant inconvenience. The distinction between ritually unclean and socially undesirable begins to collapse, and this happens in every culture. So let's go back to the account in Mark, and let's read this again in light of Levitical law. So now a woman was there who had been suffering from a hemorrhage for 12 years. She had endured a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she kept saying, "If only I touch his clothes, I will be healed." So she's in the middle of a packed crowd. An early Jewish Christian audience, as opposed to a Gentile Christian audience, would have been shocked. Because what business does this woman who renders everyone she touches ritually unclean have being in the middle of a packed crowd? And not only that, according to Levitical law, and I find this hilarious, when she touched Jesus, the human being, the human man, she would have rendered Jesus ritually unclean, at least until that evening. So, moving on with verse 29. At once the bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Jesus knew at once that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing against you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he looked around to see who had done it. So what actually happens next? Jesus heals her of the thing making her unclean, but not only that, he does so passively. He's not actively doing anything. He's not even aware of the healing until after it happens. And then he has to ask and look, right? A simple touch is what it takes for holiness and healing to spread. And holiness spreading is not our expectation. We expect dirty things to make clean things dirty, not clean things to make dirty things clean. Are you supposed to let, for example, an American flag touch the ground? No, because the ground is dirty and doing so somehow contaminates the flag. God doesn't work that way. God's love and sacredness triumph over contamination. So, returning to Mark, then the woman with fear and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." To finish things off, why is the woman with fear and trembling? I imagine that she assumed that Jesus would chew her out for touching him, because uncleanliness spreads even though the healing had actually occurred. But what happens instead? Jesus calls her daughter and claims her as family. And this is in a culture where the words daughter and family carry much more weight than they do in our culture today. For a respected teacher and healer to call her daughter would have done a huge amount to restore her standing in the community. And in fact, this is the only place in the Gospels that Jesus addresses a woman in this way. So, what does it have to do with LGBT people and with pride? So earlier I made a bold claim. I said, of all the emotions that masquerade as truth, disgust is the most dangerous. What does disgust have to do with the woman healed of her 12-year hemorrhage? So disgust as an emotion serves a function, right? It's to prevent the spread of disease. We keep our distance from each other. You see or smell poop or urine, or you encounter rotting food or even a dead body, whether it's human or not, and you feel disgusted. It's a signal to stay away from something that might hurt you. And this particular kind of hurt is special, which is why disgust is different than fear or anger. It's contamination. It's a form of hurt that spreads. And so in this way, disgust is a useful emotion. But in us primates, disgust takes on a social dimension. Originally, it was a warning to stay away from people who are sick, so disease cannot spread or be communicated. And this is critical. Disgust warns us to stay away from people, to cut them out, to even exile them from the community if necessary. And we see this all throughout the Bible. We talk about lepers, right? Because evolution doesn't care whether disease is someone's fault or not, our genetic code survived because it cut people out who risk us or risk the tribe, no questions asked. And like all emotion circuits, these early evolutionary impulses do go awry. Does our emotional self distinguish between disease that can spread versus disease that we know logically not to spread? No, people still keep their distance. We also know, based on field research in the wild, that chimpanzees kick out members that have lost their limbs because they lack the capacity to know whether that condition can actually be spread, right? Like, I don't know why you lost that leg. Maybe you have something that can hurt me. I'm going to stay away just in case. Chimpanzees certainly can't tell the difference, and neither can most humans. Now, obviously, this is unjust. Obviously, this is unfair. But evolution doesn't care about justice or fairness, it cares selfishly about survival. What constitutes a sick person or sick behavior? This is where evolution gets really interesting, because a community of humans can take something harmless or even something good, and through sustained repetition by some sort of consensus, program themselves and each other to have the exact same reaction as you would have in seeing or smelling poop or vomit. If the people around you repeatedly say something is disgusting, or behave like they're disgusted, even if they don't use the words, you learn to be disgusted by that thing. And this is how parents, even without words, transmit disgust socially to their kids. So, the hemorrhaging woman would have been seen as disgusting, and I guarantee that most, if not all, of the people around her would have had the emotional experience of disgust and would have reacted to her in that way. Take it from me, sustained social rejection destroys the spirit. So, many, if not most, Americans find LGBT people disgusting. Homophobes, obsessed with gay and lesbian sex, particularly gay male sex. Transphobes feel disgust toward anything gender nonconforming, in particular, femininity on a body that is seen as male. And, everyone with gender issues has a propensity for homophobia and transphobia. And almost all of us as Americans have gender issues because we obsess over whether we are manly enough or womanly enough, what we can wear, what can we eat. There are very few of us who are actually really secure in ourselves. Simple sustained repetition by consensus makes this so, and you don't have to be religious to absorb it. There are plenty of atheists who feel queasy about LGBT people because disgust towards LGBT people is such a strong force in our dominant culture. Now, in a very real sense, LGBT people are no different than the hemorrhaging women or lepers. The big difference, of course, is that being queer is not actually a communicable disease, notwithstanding all of the rhetoric about grooming and recruiting, right? I guarantee you, if you're a man thinking about sex with another man, that's coming from you. The idea did not come from outside of you. Plenty of LGBT people come from sheltered religious families that never talk about queerness, and they still turn out gay or queer. Most of us know this logically, but our emotion circuits don't operate on logic. Now, if we step back, disgust looms large in our political landscape and has forever. It's a driving factor in all societies. Stepping away from LGBT issues for a bit, back in 2004, there was a book published called The Politics of Disgust, The Public Identity of the Welfare Queen. And in this book, published 22 years ago, the author, Ange Marie Hancock, analyzes the political rhetoric that leveraged the emotion of disgust a decade before that, in the 90s, during the Clinton administration, around the issue of welfare. This was when Clinton, Gore, and the Democratic Party as a whole capitulated and moved to the right with welfare to work. Boo! Exactly. And, excuse me, the crap that came out of people like Rush Limbaugh back then, saying things like, quote, black people are disgusting, or acting black is disgusting, or the trope about broken families in black communities and how that's disgusting. And finally, we need to cut them off to stop enabling disgusting behavior. It's the same crap. Both the left and the right do it, by the way, but the right has automated and industrialized it at scale, especially now in the age of social media companies and AI bots and deepfakes. It operates in the present not only with LGBT issues, but with immigration, It acts on economic class because we have heard messages like, hey, poor people are disgusting, or acting poor is somehow disgusting. It even acts on enforcing toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. What makes a real man or a real woman? We even hear crap like, real men don't eat soy, or vegetables, I guess. Which, the soy thing, by the way, is not only sexist, but it's also deeply racist. I say this as a Chinese person. All right. We have to reject disgust as a tactic because no one wins. And those of us in marginalized communities need to stop falling for the trap of simply saying, but I'm not disgusting, I'm one of the good ones. You need to attack those disgusting people over there. And when the left goes on the offense against the right, we can't replicate this either. Whether it's billionaires or tech bros or landlords, we cannot resort to disgust as a strategy because it only backfires. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And, you know, I see this quote used a lot in terms of things like economic theory, like, oh, capitalism, but I think it actually goes much deeper than that. I think base emotions leveraging things like fear and anger and disgust is part of the master's toolkit. And we have to mature spiritually and transcend this, as hard as it is. So, we at Haven, of course, are a spiritual community rooted in Jesus, and this isn't simply a political rant. Over and over again, religious folks like us take our strongest and most stubborn emotional reactions and we claim that God feels the same way. I'm outraged by this, God must be outraged by this. I find this shameful, God must find this shameful. I find this disgusting, God must find this disgusting too. We baptize our emotional impulses and claim them to be divine. Now I'll say that again. We baptize our emotional impulses and claim them to be divine. This is twisted. If we are to sincerely ask the question, what would Jesus do? We have to accept the answer is to clothe the leper. Now, I don't know about you, but I certainly don't have miraculous healing powers, nor am I immune to disease, but I can take risks and I can clothe the leper. And clothing the leper is more than doing some act of public service at some distance, right? It is calling outcast people into community. It's breaking bread with each other as equals, as siblings, because disgust is about isolation and exile. And Jesus in the Gospels repeatedly does the opposite. He eats with sinners and he breaks bread with us. Now, back to LGBT pride. For those of us who don't know what it's like to be consistently told that you're disgusting, you may not understand why pride is necessary. Pride is a time to come together in community to affirm that we are not disgusting. We are not to be isolated. We are not to be exiled. We are to be together. Pride is the communal practice of learning we are not unclean. And because disgust is a social emotion, we have to do it as a group. And we have to do it in public. Now, if we do pride right, we dismantle disgust completely because it's more than simply saying that LGBT people specifically aren't disgusting. It's rejecting the framework of disgust entirely. And to be fair, this vision of pride is very lofty. I mean, the reality is that the LGBT community, my community, is deeply wounded and fractured. There's no shortage of cisgender LGBT people who find trans people like me disgusting. There's no shortage of trans people who find themselves and other trans people disgusting. Among cisgender gays and lesbians, there's all sorts of ranking and hierarchy, much of it based on disgust. We have to heal from this internalized disgust. We need to do better, and we need to start with understanding. And healing requires both proper diagnosis and proper treatment. So we have to start by diagnosing the problem and understanding the nature of the wound. And the way that these emotions are leveraged in community and the way these dynamics play out, we have to understand them. So, we really do need to embrace each other, and we need collective care in uncaring times. So, let's take a deep breath, because that was a lot. And please join me in prayer. With the help of God, let's understand our own emotional reactions and the emotional reactions of others, in particular, disgust. Let's avoid baptizing our emotional impulses as divine and God-given. Let's transcend individually and collectively toward calling each other in as equals and as siblings. And let's cultivate the skill and capacity not only to avoid replicating this in the future, but to help ourselves and each other heal from these wounds that we've received in the past. Thank you.
Oh, Jenny, thank you so much for sharing so brilliantly and heartfeltly. And I just want to take a moment to for us all to breathe that in and also to bless you, if that sounds good.
Thank you.
And then we'll go into our discussion. Holy Spirit, we welcome all of those things that Jenny just named we need to pray for. We welcome your Spirit to be doing that work, to help us move away from projecting our own emotional impulses onto you, O Divine One. From calling our instincts your instincts. May we absorb that infusion of holiness, you pouring out that counter to this disgust impulse, you pouring out that grace, that devotion, that trumps contamination. God, would you pour that out on our community, that we could participate in that lofty vision of living into a pride that dismantles even the need and capacity to be disgusted. And God, right now we ask that you would bless our sister Jenny. We thank you that you have never been disgusted with her or with anyone in this community. We honor the beautiful creation she is, made in your image. We thank you for the words you've given her to share and the deep wisdom that she brings our community and every space that she is encountered. Would you give her such a sense of your pleasure, of your joy? Would she hear you calling her daughter and claiming her as yours? Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Let's break up into small groups, I guess about 4 or 5 people. And there's a bunch of meaty questions up here. You don't have to go through them all. But please, yeah, I hope it's fruitful discussion.
Yeah, go ahead and read them just for the crew.
I'll read them. All right.
Yeah.
Number 1. Can you think of a time when you felt treated as an outsider, as a contaminant, as a burden or problem rather than as a full human being? How did that affect you? Number 2, what kinds of people do you instinctively move away from, avoid, dismiss, or keep at a distance? What emotions might be underneath that reaction? Number 3, have there been times when you were certain God agreed with your perspective, but later realized you may have been projecting your own fears, assumptions, or emotions onto God? Number 4, in the Gospels, Jesus repeatedly moves towards people others move away from. Who are the people our society moves away from today? What might it look to move toward them instead? And number 5, pride can be understood as a communal practice of healing from shame, exclusion, and being treated as contamination. What feelings or reactions does that framing bring up for you?
Beautiful. So if you're new to this community, you may not know, we like to take about 10 minutes in every service at this point to move from just all of us being in a listening space to being in a more collaborative space. And so we'll be in conversation groups of, 3 to 5 people. You're always welcome just to listen. You certainly don't need to share, but this is a space where you are welcome to share your perspective, and we can hear one another. And then in about 10 minutes, we'll return for closing worship.